Happy holidays, fellow ops monkeys. I hope everyone is getting some relaxation and fun in around the holidays here. 2020 has been one heck of a year, and I am definitely looking forward to 2021. Today we are going to do a quick run through of using Terraform 14 to create an AWS ECR Elastic Container Repository and associated IAM user in order to build and push a Docker image using CircleCI to create a very basic CI pipeline in code. Let's go ahead and set up the scenario. Say your manager, your product owner, or one of your developers comes to you and asks you to set up a basic pipeline for a WordPress Docker container and publish it to ECR with the tag of latest and the tag with the SHA. So, from that conversation, we need to identify the needs, however it came in, through an email, a ticket, a Slack notification, hopefully a ticket system. So let's identify the needs straight off the bat. We're going to need to know the repository where the Docker file is located at. We're going to need to create an AWS Elastic Container Repository to hold the Docker images. We're going to need to create an IAM user with keys and permissions to ECR. We're going to have to create a context in CircleCI with the credentials from that AWS user. We're going to need to create a CircleCI workflow to build and push the Docker image to ECR. We're going to go ahead and tag the Docker image with both latest and the SHA of the build or the commit from GitHub or Git in ECR. Alright, let's talk about setting up the environment and what you're going to need to go ahead and get started and follow along with me if you want. You're going to need an AWS account. Free tier is great, go sign up. You're going to need a GitHub account if you don't have one. Also free, go sign up. CircleCI account, again, it's free. Go sign up at the URL. Then we're going to need to create a AWS IAM user with credentials inside your account in order to run Terraform code against that account. For now, we're just going to do that locally from your laptop, so set up your account, get your keys set up through the AWS CLI. You're going to need to get Terraform installed on your machine. For this demo, we'll be using Terraform 14. Doesn't really matter in this case, but might as well be using the latest. Optional, there's a CircleCI CLI tool. If you're running a Mac, you can just do brew install CircleCI. And from there we can go ahead and run the CircleCI config validator, and you can even run jobs locally on your laptop for testing, which I do quite a bit at my job. Alright, let's stop the slides and get into it, because everyone loves slides. So let's hop over to my VS Code and we'll start getting working on this. Alright, so this is the repo we were given that has a very simple Docker file in it. Let's take a quick look at it. Alright, we can tell that it's pulling from the Bitnami WordPress version 5.6, and looks like it's changing some stuff in the PHP configs. This is all no big deal and pretty simple, so before we go any farther, let's just double check that this Docker actually builds. So flip over to my terminal here and docker build-t, we'll just call it WordPress latest, and make sure this builds. Awesome, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started on our portion of work. I'm going to quickly jump over to the AWS console. In here, you can see that I have a Terraform user set up, using these creds to set up my local environment with the AWS CLI. If you have the AWS CLI installed, just do an AWS -- configure to get your credentials set up. But this user is just an admin user that has some security credentials and a key assigned to it. From there, let's jump over to S3, play TF state bucket that I have set up here is to hold the Terraform state. There's several ways of storing your state, but S3 is my choice normally. If you're running this for production, I highly suggest that you turn on version control so that it's basically backed up and tracks the versions of your Terraform state. So now that we have a AWS user for this purposes with full permissions and a bucket to store our Terraform state in, let's hop back over to our code. Let's talk about our plans here. Going back to the requirements we identified previously, we are going to use Terraform to provision an ECR and an IAM user with creds and permissions to use that ECR. We will also use a Terraform provider to take those AWS credentials from that user, stick them into a CircleCI context for use in CircleCI. Don't worry if this doesn't make any sense to you yet. We will go through all of it as quickly as we can, but we're basically taking those creds, storing them in Circle for use using Terraform. We will then set up a CircleCI workflow in this repo to automatically build and publish this Docker image to ECR for us. With that, let's go ahead and start to set up a simple structure inside this repo. I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder in here. And we're simply just going to call it Terraform. There's a lot of ways to store your Terraform code. You could store it in a totally different repo. You could store it in here in different formats and in different trees. For the sense of this demo, I'm just going to store it right here with the Docker file, but I am going to organize it inside this folder. So inside this folder, let's go ahead and create a file. We're going to call this one main.tf. This will hold all the configuration for Terraform, including the providers or anything else like that. Don't worry about any errors that VS Code might throw at you right now. We're also going to create another file. I'm going to call this one variables.tf. This will hold any variables for TF, and just let Terraform use this file. And I like to keep my stuff structured out so it's easy to work in. We're also going to go ahead and create another one. We'll call it ecr.tf. And while we're at it, just one more. And call it CircleCI user.tf. Now it doesn't matter what you really call these, Terraform will pick up any .tf files that are inside the directory that you're running Terraform in. So let's pop over to our main real quick, and we're going to start to set up the configuration for Terraform. So Terraform, and we're going to do a backend. And our backend is S3. It's that bucket that we had set up previously. And we're going to go bucket equals play-tf state, which is the name of the bucket. Key equals, this is going to be the path inside the bucket. We are simply just going to call this one tf circle ECR demo, and that's going to be the name of our state file. We're going to go ahead and just do this straight in US West 2. So that basically sets up the block and configuration needed to tell Terraform what to do. From here, we're actually going to add another one, which is called required providers. And this is where we're going to add a CircleCI provider that we need to finish off our work. CircleCI equals source where to get it from, and this actually pulls from the Terraform Registry, which we'll touch on in just a second. Version equals 0.4.0. And we can see that does that out. We're going to add in a provider down here. profile equals, in my case it's going to be test, in your case it might actually be default. This is set up in the way that your AWS CLI is set up, the profile for that. And region, we'll make a var for region because we're going to use it in other places. And then we need to do the provider for CircleCI that we talked about up there, because that provider needs some configuration also. And it's going to need an API token, which we'll do var.circle token, and we will get that from CircleCI in a bit. Organization, this is actually your GitHub organization. CircleCI and GitHub are tied together, or if you used it with GitLab or something else, it might be that. We'll turn this into a var also. Alright, let's touch on the providers here a little bit and what they actually are for those who don't know, and we'll hop over to this. This is the Terraform Registry. This is a public registry that houses all sorts of public providers and public modules. If we go down here and read, we can see that providers are plugins that implement resource types. This is where you can find the providers for cloud platforms and services you use and add them to your configuration, then use their resources to provision infrastructure. So guys, this is basically, providers are APIs for different services such as AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or in our case, CircleCI. Now let's touch on modules real quick. Terraform modules are small but reusable Terraform configurations that let you manage a group of related resources as if they were a single resource. Basically, they're repeatable bits of Terraform code that can create resources for you using providers. These are great and save you a ton of time when you're writing things from scratch in Terraform. Someone else out there has already done the work for you. If you go look and find it, you can normally find a module that's pretty easy to use to create whatever you're trying to create inside Terraform. In this case, we will be using both AWS and CircleCI based providers for this demo. If I go up here and look for CircleCI, this mrolla CircleCI provider is the one that we are actually going to use, so shout out to this guy and a few other guys that have worked on it with him. I've been following it for a little bit, and I use it for this demo, and I also use it at work, so thank you much, guys. Let's jump back over to our code and start finishing this off. I'm gonna fix my code real quick here because they should be equal signs. Hit save. Let's jump over to creating the ECR repository. So in order to do that, we just need to create a really simple resource. And I like to note mine, create ECR. So we'll do resource. It's going to be AWS ECR repository. And we'll just call it ECR underscore repo. Name equals var.name. We'll set up these variables here in just a minute. Image, tag mutability. And we'll make this mutable. And we'll just turn off image scanning for now. Image scanning, it can scan your Docker containers for security vulnerabilities inside ECR, which is a really good thing if you're running in production. So image scanning configuration, scan on push, and we'll just set this to false for right now. So this is just going to create us a basic ECR Using the name that we'll set in the variables, it's going to image tag. It will allow overwriting of image tags, and it's not going to scan on any pushes for us. And that'll keep it in code for us. Let's just flop over and we'll define the variables that we're going to need. First one that I recall is the region that we were using in main. So variable region description equals AWS region to use, and we'll set a default and we're going to use the US West 2 region for this. You can also go ahead and add the type if you want on a variable, and this one will be a string. The next variable that we need is going to be environment. I'll use this in a few different places in the code. Same thing, description. This would be handy if you had multiple environments such as test, dev, staging, production. And we'll default this one to just test for right now. We'll also need the variable of name. Same thing, let's add a description. Use for resources. And we'll just call this WordPress because that's what the container is. What else did we need? Oh, we needed organization for the CircleCI provider. Let's say get a organization to use. Type equals string, and we're going to default this to the Ops Monkeys organization. Variable, then we needed the CircleCI CLI token. CircleCI CLI token to use. Equals string. We won't set a default on this, that way Terraform will ask us for it. You can also set it as a Terraform var and pass it to Terraform as you're running Terraform. And let's go ahead and add a pretty standard variable with tags. Should always tag your stuff, boy. That way you can track it later on when you need to. Actually, we'll do a map of string. That way if we want to add things on later, we can. So we'll call this managed by, just so that we know. And equals the value of Terraform These are your key value pairs for tags. So let's quickly look: region, environment, name, organization, CircleCI, token, tags. I think that should be it. I guess we'll find out once we do that. So let's hop over to the CircleCI user. In here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a IAM user that's for CircleCI to use for accessing the AWS ECR to push the Docker image. So we're going to create the IAM user, we're going to give it keys, we're going to add a policy document to it, which gives it access to the ECR, and then we're going to take that user, those keys, and the ECR URL, and we're going to stick it in a circle context. A circle context is basically almost like environment variables. It's a high-level environment variable that's accessible inside CircleCI, any job that calls that context. There's also a concept of project environment variables that are only for CircleCI projects, so we'll get into that. Contexts are organizational wide. Project environment variables are only per project or only per repo. So let's jump into this. One thing that we're going to need to get started here is we're going to need to pull the AWS Account Id, and we do that by using data in Terraform. So let's say get AWS Account Id, and we're going to do data AWS color identity, and we'll just call this current. So this is going to use our current AWS user to be able to grab information back for it so that we can use it inside of our resources. So resource. And this is where we're going to start to create the user. And we'll just call it CI underscore WordPress. And name equals CI dash, we'll use that var that we said of name. And tags, we'll add the tags here, var.tags. Don't forget to stick my little comment in here, create IAM user. And then for that user, we're going to need to create a key. So another resource, AWS IAM access key. And we'll just call it AWS access key. And what user do we need the key for? Well, it's going to be user equals AWS IAM user dot CI underscore WordPress, the user that we created right above this. This key needs the user to be there, so we're going to use a Terraform concept of depends on. So it depends on equals, and you can put in a list of different resources that this resource depends on, which means that this won't even try to be created until the other one is created. And we're just going to say it depends on AWS IAM user CI WordPress. Now we're going to create a policy document that is a data resource in Terraform. So we're going to create data inside Terraform, data AWS IAM policy document. And we'll call this user policy. And in this you can write out policy statements inside Terraform, so we're just going to do a statement. Notice how this is all in JSON. Effect equals allow, and then we're going to list out the actions. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this list in. That way you guys didn't have to watch me type that all out. Those permissions, basically, if we want to look through them, are just giving permissions to ECR. And we are going to limit that to those single ECR, so that this circle job will only have permissions to work on this one single ECR. AWS ECR Repository .ecr repo .arn. We're just going to get the arn straight off of the repo that we're creating over there. And then we're going to add one more statement. With the effect of allow. And we're going to add some more actions. Same thing, I'll go grab it. And this is going to allow this user to get a token for ECR, and basically so that it can actually authenticate to it before it tries to push anything to it. So this one is going to be resources equals will allow any. So just a star. And helps if we put it in the right place. That was looking around to me. Right here. Alright. So now that we've got this policy document written out that will give that permissions, we need to use this document. So we're going to create a policy from it. So create policy from document. Resource AWS IAM user policy. And we'll just call it user policy. Name equals, we'll do the var.name dash policy. The user is going to be the user that we created above, so AWS IAM underscore user dot CI underscore WordPress dot name. And remember, that's just this user that we created way up here. Missed an S there. CI underscore WordPress. The policy is going to come from the data document above. So data policy equals data dot AWS IAM policy document dot user underscore policy dot JSON. Alright, so we've created a IAM user with these permissions. Now we want to take that IAM user and its creds and some information and go ahead and put it in Circle automatically for us. So let's go ahead and say we're going to create a CircleCI context, and it's going to be another Terraform resource of CircleCI context, and we will name it CI user. And this also needs to basically depend on that IAM user being created. So let's go ahead and just start with depends on, and we'll just put it right here, AWS IAM user dot CI underscore WordPress. And then the name of this context, we'll do it var.name and var.environment. And then we're going to need the organization, var.organization. So that's going to create the context for us. Now we're going to want to be able to stick variables inside that context. So let's say add the user to context, resource, CircleCI, context, environment, variable, and we'll call this AWS access key ID. And this environment variable is going to depend on the context being created. So same thing, let's do it depends on equals CircleCI context.ci user. And then the variable equals AWS access key ID. This is going to be the name of the environment variable inside Circle. And the value of that is going to be AWS IAM access key dot AWS access key dot ID. So it's the access key that we created above for that user. And then we need to tell it what context to put this environment variable in. So context underscore ID equals CircleCI context dot CI user dot ID. And then we also need the organization again. Equals var dot organization. Perfect. So that's going to add an environment variable with the access key ID in there. So we're just going to copy this because we're going to repeat this a few times. Because now we need the key, right? So CircleCI environment variable AWS secret access key and then same thing, AWS secret access key. Same thing, it's going to depend on it. The value is going to be a little bit different though. So AWS access key, and instead of ID, we're going to grab the secret from it. Rest is the same. We're going to do this again. Go ahead and copy it. This one is going to be AWS default region instead, AWS default region. Change the name of it, AWS default region. value here is going to be var region. And we're going to save that. Add region to the context. And we'll do it one more time. We're going to copy this. Add ECR URL to context. So this is going to be AWS ECR account URL, and we need this inside Circle to be able to authenticate. Same thing, it's going to depend on the user being there. ECR account URL, and the value on this one is going to be a little bit interesting, but it's going to use that data that we got from above. So data.aws caller identity, remember this from up there, current account ID. So it's going to pull the account ID from our current caller identity. And then we're going to do .dkr.ecr, and same thing, we're going to use our .region here, .amazon aws.com. So that's the URL of the repository. You can get the URL output also from the output of the Terraform creation, but it includes the /name. In this case, we just want the URL. We'll hit save and format that document. And technically, if all of our Terraform is good, we can do an init in a plan. So let's go ahead and cd into the Terraform folder and do a Terraform. Actually, let's just double check that my Terraform version is correct. I'll show you guys a little tool that I use. It's called Tfv Env. This manages different Terraform environments on your machine, so if you have to switch in between different Terraform versions for different projects that you're working on, you can use that to install and change in between them. So we're just going to do a Tfv Env use 0.14.3. You can see it was switching over. Let's go ahead and do a Terraform init. Initialize our workspace, set up where the state is being stored from what we said in main, and double check everything is good. Alright, let's go ahead and do our next step, which is a Terraform Plan. And we'll let this run. This is where it's going to ask you for that CircleCI token. Remember I said I was going to touch on this a little bit. So let me flip over to my browser real quick. What you need to do is you'll need to go sign up for CircleCI. When you come in here, it's going to basically look like this. Once you get all involved in there, you can click on your little user down here, go to Personal API Tokens, say create a new token, testing. We'll grab this token, and don't worry, I'll delete it after this video. And then if we hop back over to our code, and we'll paste it into here. Now what this is going to do is it's going to go out and look at AWS, it's going to look at CircleCI, and take a look and see what it thinks it should be creating. Now we can see that it came back and said that it's going to add 9, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. So let's just take a quick look through and make sure it's creating everything we think that it's supposed to create. So in Terraform, if it has a plus, it means it's going to add it. If it has a minus, it means it's going to remove it. In the case of read, it looks like this, where it's reading data from a policy document that we're creating in there. And then it's going to create the repo, it's going to create the access key, going to create the user, going to create the user policy, the Circle context, the Circle environment variables. Looks pretty good. At this point in time, we can go ahead and do a Terraform apply. Paste in our token. We can see that it's going through and telling us that it's going to create everything and making sure we want to perform these actions. We're going to say yes. And we can see it's going through and creating everything for us. It says 9 added, 0 change, 0 destroy. So let's just go double check that all those AWS resources and the Circle resources we created are actually there. So propping back over to my browser, we'll go over to Amazon and we'll flip over to the Elastic Container Registry. And we can see that it has created the repository for WordPress. Tag immutability is disabled and scan on push is disabled, just like we said, and it was just created for us. That's awesome. Let's go jump over to IAM. And there should be a new CI or a new WordPress test user, CI WordPress user. And we can see that it has the WordPress policy that we attach to it and the security credentials, all made by Terraform. Now the second part of this was it took this user and stuck it into a context in CircleCI. So let's go back to CircleCI real quick. If we go over to organizational settings, we can see that there is a new context in here called WordPress test. That if we go in here, it has our access key ID, our default region, our ECR account URL, and our secret access key all stored in here. And you can only see the last 4 digits of these, which is great. It helps keep them secure. Word on context here is that you can control the security by using GitHub groups or GitLab groups, depending, and you can just add security groups here. That's the only people in those groups are allowed to actually use this context in their workflow, and we'll get to that. So we use Terraform to create the ECR, create the user, create the keys, and then use a CircleCI provider to actually add a context to Circle to get us ready to do our CI workflow with CircleCI. So let's move on to that now. CircleCI. CircleCI is a build system. You want to think Jenkins or code build or code deploy or anything out there, GitLab. CircleCI is a build system, a continuous integration system. It can also handle deploys. It can basically do whatever you set it up to do. One of the big benefits to it is that it can parallelize jobs out. So instead of running jobs completely in order, you can parallelize them out and build workflows around that. On top of that, it has great integrations with GitHub, with Slack, with pretty much everything out there. And then another big benefit is Orbs. CircleCI Orbs are just like Terraform modules in the fact that they are repeatable chunks of Circle YAML that you can pull into your workflow so that you don't have to write them out. We are going to do an example of that using this to build out that Docker container and publish it to ECR. So with that, let's jump back over to our repo. And well, actually, let's stop and we'll walk through this. So if you're in CircleCI, they have a concept of projects. Projects are simply just repositories that you're working in. If we go in here, we can see that I have no projects yet. So if we went in here and said add projects, it's going to go and scan for repositories in your organization or in your personal GitHub account or GitLab account, however you set this up. You can see our demo one in here. We're going to go ahead and click set up projects. It's nice enough that it will write you out a config on your branch just to get started. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go write out our own config. So we're going to say use existing config, and we will actually come back to this. Just like Terraform, CircleCI allows you to write out everything in YAML so that it's all held in code. So going along with our infrastructure as code, it's great. So we're going to flip back over to this, and we're going to go ahead and create another new folder in here called .CircleCI. This will house the configuration for CircleCI, and CircleCI automatically looks for this folder, and then we're going to create a new file called config.yaml. So once we're in here, this is going to be a YAML-driven configuration for CircleCI. Their syntax is actually fairly easy. You can look through all of their documentations. We're going to do a very simple one using an orb to build out a Docker build and push workflow through Circle. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we need to do is define the version, and this is the version of the Circle YAML. So version 2.1. We're going to add in some anchors, which this just allows you to make repeatable chunks of YAML inside your file so that you don't have to repeat code all over the place. So we're going to call this filters. And what we're going to put in here is a branch filter, just so that this only runs on our main branch. In a CI system, you can set this up to do it for PRs, you can do it on different types of branches, do different things on different branches. That's what all these filters are for. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to call an orb. And the orb that we're going to call is AWS ECR. And this is a public orb, which I will show you guys in just a minute what this is. And you can write your own orbs, which I do a lot also. That way, if you have like 50 repositories that are all basically doing the same pattern, you can build orbs off of those patterns, and then you don't have to constantly repeat that code. Let's go ahead and pop back over to the browser and we'll take a look at this specific orb so you know exactly what I'm talking about here. So if we go over here, this is the CircleCI developer orbs page. This is where you can see all orbs are technically public. You can't make them private, but orbs are repeatable chunks of code, so they're shared all over the place. The one that we're actually looking for is this one. You can see how popular it is. It's right on the front page. So we're going to go click into here. And it gives you a quick start guide, how to use it, examples of how to use it. The purpose of this orb is it basically authenticates to ECR, gets yourself a token, it builds out a Docker file, and then pushes it to ECR with whatever tags. And all of the code is already written out for you. You're basically just passing this options, as you can see. If you wanted to, you could actually look at the source. And here's the source code, and if you can imagine if you had 50 repositories all using the same code, how much of this you'd be copying hundreds and hundreds of lines of YAML in between all of your different repositories. So this is great where orbs come in. So we're going to flip back over to our code and show you how to use this orb. We've defined some filters, we've called that orb in our file. Now we're going to define what is called a workflow in Circle. In Circle you have commands, jobs, and workflows. In this case, we don't need to define any commands or any of our own jobs. The orb has already done it for us. So what we're going to do is define a workflow, and we'll call it build and push image. And inside that workflow, it's going to have jobs. And we're going to call the AWS ECR orb, and we're going to call the build and push images or image job from that orb. So this is basically coming straight out of their documentation. You can go and look at it and read. All of the orbs are slightly different, but you're basically just going to pass it options now. One thing we are going to do here is we are going to include our anchor or our filters up there. So star.filter, and then we're basically going to put a name on this, which this is the name that shows up inside the Circle UI. Build and push Docker image. And then we're going to start feeding it the options that we saw in that page. Right after I fix my indentation. And yes. So one thing we need to feed it is the account URL. And we want it to use the environment variables from that circle context that we created with Terraform. AWS ECR account URL. Next we need the AWS access key ID. The AWS secret access key. The region. And just remember, it's getting all of these from that context. Speaking of the context, we'll specify here what context to use inside Circle. And our context was called WordPress test, which houses all those environment variables above. One of the options on this org was to create the repo. We're going to set that to false because we're managing it with Terraform. The Docker file that we wanted to build, just Docker file. You can put a no output timeout in here, just in case something happens you want it to time out and quit. We'll do the path to get to the Docker file, which is just a period. The AWS profile name to use. We can just set this to default for Circle. The repo name. WordPress, this is actually the tag that gets used. So it's going to tag the Docker file, the URL, plus WordPress, plus whatever tags. Skip when tag exist is one that we need to add. So this would check to see if the tag already exists and skips it, but in this case we're going to want it to overwrite because they want a tag of latest on there, remember that. And then tags, we're going to want to pass it a list to use of latest, and then the Circle SHA-1, which is actually comes from Circle. It's an environment variable that's just default in Circle that you can grab, but it's the SHA that comes from GitHub. And I think that's it, guys. This will set up an entire pipeline that will check out the code, authenticate the ECR, build the Docker container, tag the Docker container, and then push it up for us. Now, one thing I want to note is CircleCI does have a CLI tool that you can run locally to validate your configs, validate your orbs, and even test your jobs locally. In this case, let's just double check ours. If we go back a folder and we can do CircleCI config validate dot circle CircleCI config.yaml, and this will basically just analyze it to make sure everything looks correct. In this case, it says it cannot find a definition for a job name build. Oh, workflows, not workflow. See, that's why they have that validate tool. So now it says that our configuration is valid. Let's go ahead and we'll do a commit of all of this and push it up. So git add, git commit -m. I hope you pulled a branch if you're working on someone else's repo. Testing circle. And then we'll go ahead and push it up to origin. Now this is where we're going to want to jump back over to Circle. Since the project wasn't set up, if you remember, we just paused on that page, on this page right here. Now we can say use existing config and say yes, we already added it, and we'll just say start building. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to add a key to the repo under your user so that it can check it out and run anything that it needs to run on it. So you can see that Circle is now running. If we go ahead and click into the workflow of build and push image, we can see that it has a job of build and push Docker image. If we click into that, we can see that it's spinning up the environment, it's adding the environment variables, it's checking out the code, and remember, all of this is coming from that orb, so we didn't have to write any of this. It's installing the AWS CLI, configuring all the keys. You can see now that it's go ahead and it's building our Docker image for us. And we'll just give it a minute here to build. Hopefully it shouldn't be too long. And we can see the build is done, and it's now pushing the image up to the Amazon ECR repo. And there it's done. You can see that it pushed both of our images with both the tags up to it. Says it's completely done. We should go back and we can see that everything is marked as a success inside Circle, which is great. So it just did that all for us. If we click back over to the AWS console and go back over to the ECR repo, we should be able to click into WordPress and see the new image that was pushed up, and you can see that it was tagged with the SHA and it was tagged with latest. Technically, you just provisioned all of this with Terraform as infrastructure as code. You added a CircleCI in that is now automatically going to build and push this image anytime that there is commits to the repo. That ticket that was put in at the very beginning of this is now done. You could turn it over to the developers and they could move on. As a DevOps engineer, there's lots that could be done to improve this process. Things that could be added in, including automating the Terraform, doing some Docker linting, doing some checks or tests on the Docker container before pushing it up, etc. And you can build multiple things into the CircleCI workflow. Do that all. You can add approval, add Slack notifications. A lot of this maybe we'll dive into in future videos. But guys, I know this has been a really long one, especially for the end of the year and holidays. But hopefully you guys got to learn something about using Terraform, AWS ECR, CircleCI, any of those bits. I encourage you to go play with any of them. Let me know what you think, and happy holidays, everyone.